Dakota Territory, late spring of 1877, just outside of Deadwood. Harriet Galloway stood barefoot in the creek, her dress soaked to the knees, whispering to the water like it could answer back. A hawk circled overhead. The trees rustled low and steady, and the townsfolk on the ridge behind her whispered too, but not kindly like the trees. "She is touched in the head," muttered old Mrs. Bell from the mercantile, arms folded tight across her apron. "Talks to rocks, sleeps in the hills. Left them babies to the wolves." "She did not," said the blacksmith, less certain now as he looked across the field. Harriet bent down and placed a small carved figure onto a stone in the stream. It was a child's toy, roughly hewn, worn smooth at the edges. She did not look back at the crowd. She never did. They only came to gawk, and that was when the cowboy came. His name was Owen Larmer. He had ridden in from Wyoming 3 days past, lean and sun-browned, with a bay mare that limped and a rifle that had seen better days. No one knew why he stayed, only that he did. And on this morning he stepped down from the porch of the inn and walked across the field, straight to the woman everyone said was mad. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at her. "What are you doing out there?" he asked, voice steady. Harriet turned her head. Her eyes were sharp green, focused. "Saying goodbye to who, my son?" She didn't blink. "He died in this creek 3 years ago. He was 5. The air shifted. Owen took off his hat. "I am sorry," she nodded once. "He was chasing frogs." I turned my back for one breath. The crowd behind them started to thin, uncertain now. "And the other?" he asked, quiet. Her throat moved. "My daughter, Clara. I gave her to the preacher's wife the next day. I could not touch her without seeing him." Owen stepped into the creek. She did not move away. "I heard them say you are not right in the mind," he said, crouching beside her. "I hear them too," she said. "They are wrong." "I know." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why do you?" "Because you make more sense than anyone I have met in this town." Something in her broke open. Not loudly, not in tears, just a soft breath like she had not let one out in years. He helped her stand from the creek. They walked back together. The next day, Owen rode out before dawn. No one saw where he went. By dusk, he returned with a girl of about 6 riding before him, her arms around his waist and her chin tucked into his back. The preacher's wife came running, breathless. "She has not spoken in over a year." Clara did not speak then either. But when Harriet knelt before her, hands trembling, the little girl reached out and touched her mother's face. Harriet did not cry. She just wrapped her arms around her child and held her for a long, long time. Owen stayed back, hat in hand. That night, Harriet cooked stew in her cabin for the first time in years. Clara fell asleep curled against her side. Owen took his plate to the porch and sat in the quiet, watching the stars blink one by one into the sky. She joined him a while later, a blanket around her shoulders. "You went all the way to Elk Creek to get her," she said. "I did." "Why?" He glanced at her. "Because you should not have had to do that alone." She looked down at her hands. "I lost my mind for a while." "No, you lost your son." A quiet passed between them, then she said, "Do you have children?" He shook his head. "Never married." "What did you come here for?" "Peace, I guess. Never found it." She looked at him. "Maybe now you will." He looked at her. "Maybe." They sat side by side, the air cooler now but not cold. Inside, Clara murmured in her sleep. Harriet wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, then leaned just slightly toward him. Owen did not move away. Neither of them said anything more, but something had shifted. Something had begun. Harriet rose before the sun, not from habit, but from the small hand curled in hers. Clara slept lightly, lips parted, lashes trembling now and then like she was walking through some old dream. Harriet studied her in the hush before morning, her thoughts a slow tide. There was no undoing what had been done, but the girl was here now, and she was warm. A soft knock came at the door. She opened it to find Owen holding a tin pail of milk. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, hands rough with the morning's work. "She's sleepin' all right?" he asked. "She hasn't stirred once," Harriet said. "You didn't have to fetch milk." "I was headed that way anyhow, figured you could use it." She stepped aside, nodding toward the table. The cabin was simple pine walls, a stone hearth, 2 chairs, and a cot for Clara, but it was clean now. She'd scrubbed it after the girl came home, like she wanted the walls to forget what they'd seen. Owen set the pail down. I can build a box for her things. She doesn't have any, she will. Harriet sat, hands resting on the worn tabletop. Why do you help us? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the window instead, where light crept in pale and quiet. I was 16 when my sister drowned, he said finally. In the Platte. I was supposed to watch her. Harriet didn't speak, but her fingers closed over each other. My mother wouldn't speak my name for 2 years. My father left a month after. I stayed on the ranch, finished what needed finishing, then left. She looked at him, her voice low. I'm sorry. I don't tell that to be pitied. I know. He took a seat across from her, the wood creaking beneath his weight. I've looked for a place that didn't ache. You think this might be one, don't know yet, but it feels different. Clara stirred in the cot, one small arm lifting over her head before settling again. Harriet leaned back, her eyes still on the child. She hasn't spoken since that day. I don't know if she ever will. Maybe she doesn't need to, Owen said. Not yet. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something steady, like the ground holding them both. Later that morning, they walked to the edge of the meadow where the soil was dark and loose. Owen brought a spade, and Harriet carried a folded quilt under one arm. They didn't speak while he dug. When the hole was deep enough, she laid the quilt inside it and added her son's toy, the one she'd left in the creek. Then she placed a small bundle of wild sage she'd gathered at dawn. She stood over it a moment, then nodded. Owen filled the earth back in, tamping it gently. When it was done, she pressed her palm to the ground and whispered something Owen didn't try to hear. They walked back slowly, Clara holding Harriet's hand now, her small legs moving carefully across the uneven grass. That afternoon, Owen began building a shelf in the corner of the cabin. He didn't ask. He just brought the planks up from his packhorse and started measuring. Harriet watched from the doorway. You always fix things that don't ask to be fixed, she asked. He looked up. Only when they're worth the trouble. She folded her arms. You think we are, I know you are. She held his gaze a moment too long, then turned and went inside. By nightfall, Clara had drawn her first picture with a charcoal stub Owen gave her. It was rough, but it looked like a house with smoke curling from the chimney. Harriet pinned it to the wall. They ate by candlelight, not speaking much. Just the scrape of spoons and the rustle of wind outside. When Owen stood to leave, Harriet followed him to the porch. I can make you a bed of straw in the shed, she said, if you plan to stay longer. I was thinking the same, he said. Didn't want to ask. You didn't have to. He tipped his head. Good night, Harriet. Good night, Owen. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. But when she returned inside, she found Clara watching her with wide, thoughtful eyes, as if she'd seen something she hadn't known how to name. Harriet brushed the girl's hair back gently. Everything's all right, she said, and for the first time in years she believed it. The first hard rain came 5 days after Clara returned, thick and sudden. It rolled in from the west, flattening the grasses and drumming on the cabin roof with a sound that made Harriet pause mid-stitch. Owen had gone out early to mend the pasture fence near the ridge, and by now the sky had turned the color of ash. Harriet stood at the door, eyes scanning the field beyond the trees. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor behind her, threading a dull needle through a scrap of muslin. The girl didn't speak, but she watched her mother's back with a quiet knowing. When Owen finally came into view, soaked through and leading the mare by her bridle, Harriet stepped aside without a word. He ducked inside, shaking water from his sleeves. You're lucky the lightning didn't find you, she said, taking the oilskin he handed her, the ridges clear of trees. I stayed low. She hung the coat near the hearth and added wood to the flames. The smoke curled sharp, and the wet in his clothes gave off the scent of earth and iron. He crouched near Clara, nodding to her stitching. That for your doll, she held it up, the fabric square, uneven but firm. He gave a quiet sound of approval, then rose and looked to Harriet. The north fence is near gone, rot in the posts. I can cut new ones tomorrow, maybe from that stand of pine near the creek head. She folded her arms. You planning to stay through the season then? He met her eyes. If there's space. There's space, she said, then turned to the stove. I'll put on coffee. By evening, the rain eased into a steady mist. Owen sat on the porch sharpening a draw knife while Harriet brought out a bowl of cornmeal batter. She tilted her head toward him. You ever build something start to finish? She asked. Not just fix what's broken, he shook his head. Didn't often have the time or reason. What would you build if you could? His voice came after a pause. A house that didn't feel borrowed. Where you could leave things where they were and expect to find them in the morning. She stirred the batter, slow and thoughtful. You talk like you've never had that. I haven't. She stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Neither have I. Clara came out behind her, arms crossed against the damp. Owen set aside the blade and reached into his satchel, pulling out a small tin horse with one wheel missing. Found this at the edge of town, he said, crouching again. Thought maybe it could run again if someone helped it. Clara took it gently. Her fingers moved over the metal, then she looked up at him, eyes clear. She didn't speak, but she smiled. That night, the three of them sat close by the fire. Harriet's hair, still damp, had curled loose around her neck. Owen sat with one boot off, rubbing the sore ankle he'd twisted in the mud earlier. Clara leaned against her mother's side, the tin horse clutched in her lap. Harriet turned to him. What will they say, do you think, when they see you still here? They'll say I've lost my sense. And you, he looked at her, tired and warm and steady. I'll say I found it. She didn't look away, neither did he. The fire burned low, but no one moved to add wood. The quiet between them no longer felt like distance, it felt like something being built, piece by piece over time. And this time, no one was alone. The frost came early that year, catching the trees mid-turn. The maples near the far slope dropped their leaves in a single afternoon, and the air turned sharp enough that Harriet kept Clara bundled even indoors. Owen had finished the last of the new fence days before, and now spent mornings cutting dry pine from the ridge to stack behind the cabin. He came in late one afternoon, boots dusted with bark, and set a bundle of kindling by the hearth. Clara stood at the table, arranging a row of pebbles she'd collected in the yard. Harriet stirred a pot on the stove, her sleeves rolled, a streak of flour at her wrist. I passed the mercantile on the way back, Owen said, setting his gloves down. Storekeep's wife asked if we'd be coming to the harvest gathering. Harriet didn't turn from the pot. She asked you that with a smile or a warning? He stepped closer, warming his hands near the fire. Closer to a dare. I haven't set foot in that hall since the year after Will died. Folks still lower their voices when they pass me in the street. Then maybe it's time they didn't. She glanced at him, skeptical. You think a dance will change that? No. But walking in with your head high might. Clara's stones toppled, one rolling off the edge of the table. She dropped to retrieve it, then placed it back without fuss. Harriet watched her a moment. I don't own anything decent, she said at last. I do, Owen replied. And I'll wear it. She gave a short breath, not quite laughter. You sure you want to be seen standing beside the woman they say is soft in the head? He met her eyes. I said you make more sense than anyone in this town. I meant it. She went quiet, stirring slower now, the scent of sage and onion rising from the pot. I'll think on it, she said. That night, after Clara had gone to sleep, Harriet sat by the fire with a thimble and thread, letting the quiet stretch between them. Owen carved a length of wood beside her, shaving it down with a practiced hand. You always this sure-footed? She asked suddenly. He looked up. Not always. I left a lot of things behind I shouldn't have. Like what? A brother, he said simply. Name was Ali. She folded the fabric in her lap. What happened? Owen set the knife down. I went east when the cattle work dried up. He stayed behind to keep our mother's land, said I was chasing ghosts. We parted angry. He wrote once, I never answered. She didn't press him for more. Instead, she reached for the tin of salve near the hearth and held it out. Your knuckles are bleeding. He looked down, surprised. Didn't notice. You never do, she said. You work too hard. He took the salve but didn't apply it. You had to stop working once, didn't you? When Clara came back, she nodded slowly. I couldn't think beyond keeping her fed and warm. That first week I barely slept. She's different now. She's growing, Harriet said. She's not afraid of the dark anymore or of me. Owen leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You want to stay here through winter? I do, she said. But if we do, we'll need more than what's in the root cellar. I can ride out to the trading post, he offered. Take a pack mule, bring back flour and beans, maybe some molasses. You do that for us, he looked at her steady. I already am. The fire cracked, sending sparks up the chimney. Harriet reached across and took the salve from his hand, uncapped it, and gently smeared it across his knuckles. You don't always have to do everything yourself, she said. He didn't answer, but his hand stayed in hers longer than it needed to. In the morning, Harriet found Clara standing at the window, watching the frost melt from the grass. Without turning, the girl spoke in a voice soft as breath. Are we going to the dance? Harriet crouched beside her. Would you want to? Clara nodded once. Harriet pressed her lips to the girl's temple. Then we'll go. And when Owen came in from the woods, fresh pine clinging to his coat, she met him at the door. I'll need a ribbon, she said. Something blue, he grinned. I'll bring back the finest one they've got. She didn't tell him, but she still had the blue ribbon she wore the day Will was born, folded in a box beneath the floorboards. She hadn't touched it in years. That night, she took it out and washed it clean. The morning of the gathering broke clear, the sky flat and pale behind the cottonwoods. A fine crust of ice shimmered on the pump handle out back, and Owen took care not to wake Clara as he eased the door shut behind him. The mule had been loaded the day before, and he set off at first light, his breath clouding in the cold. Harriet stood at the window long after he disappeared into the trees. Inside, the cabin was quiet but not still. Clara traced her finger along the edge of a wood-carved box. Owen had given her 2 nights earlier a place to keep her stones, he'd said. She hadn't spoken since the question about the dance, but she hummed sometimes now, tuneless little sounds that filled the corners of the room. By midday, Harriet had laid out the dress she hadn't worn since before her son's passing, taken in at the waist and let out at the shoulders. She worked on the hem by the fire while Clara stitched a ribbon to her own collar, her brow furrowed with careful focus. Owen returned just before dusk, the mule tired but steady beneath the weight of 2 sacks, 1 flour, the other a mix of beans, dried apples, and a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. He handed the parcel to Clara without a word. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a hairbrush carved from maple, the back etched with a row of tiny horses. Harriet met his eyes. You didn't have to bring anything more. She's going to be seen tonight. She ought to have something fine. They left just after sundown, the lantern swinging gently from Owen's hand as they made their way down the slope into town. The hall was lit with strings of oil lamps, their glow catching in the frost along the windows. Fiddles sounded faintly from within, and the scent of roasted squash and cider drifted out to meet them. Conversations paused as they entered. Harriet's hand stayed on Clara's shoulder, steady and light. Owen offered a brief nod to the man at the door, then guided them inside. No one spoke at first, but no one stopped them either. Harriet held her chin level, her eyes scanning the room without flinching. Clara clung to her side until a girl near her age offered a slice of pie without a word. Harriet gave a small nod, and Clara followed the girl to a bench near the back, her shoulders straight. Owen stood beside Harriet, his arm not quite touching hers. Some of them still won't say your name, he said softly. They don't have to. Do you want to dance? She glanced at the floor where a few couples moved in slow, careful steps. It's been years. I'll follow your lead. She hesitated, then stepped forward into the circle of his arm, his hand settled at her back, sure and warm. They moved together without ceremony, without flourish, just quiet, even steps that matched the rise and fall of the fiddles. Her voice barely rose above the music. Will you stay through winter? He looked at her. I was hoping to stay longer. She met his gaze. You mean that? I do. The dance ended, but neither stepped away. Later, Clara dozed on a quilt near the hearth while Harriet and Owen sat on the porch outside the hall. The moon hung low over the hills, the frost glittering across the field where wagons stood hitched in rows. Harriet folded her hands in her lap. "I used to believe I was meant to lose things, that I would always be the woman people pitied." "You're not," Owen said. "You never were." She turned toward him. "You made me remember what it feels like to want something again." He reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping gently around hers. "You don't have to want it alone." The wind lifted a strand of her hair. He brushed it back, his touch careful. She leaned in then, without hesitation, and kissed him soft and sure, like something she had been carrying for years and was finally ready to set down. In the weeks that followed, the days shortened and the frost deepened. Owen moved into the cabin fully, building a second cot for Clara and a cupboard for Harriet's herbs. He mended the door latch without being asked, and Harriet taught him to sew a straight line when the hem of his coat gave out. Clara began speaking again, not often and not loudly, but with words that came when she felt safe. Her stories were short, mostly about the mule or the moon or the hawk she'd seen circling above the creek. Harriet listened to everyone. By New Year's, the town no longer whispered when the three of them passed. Some waved. A few offered bread or preserves. The storekeep began setting aside items before the shelves emptied. One night, as snow fell soft and steady outside, Owen stood by the hearth with a small leather pouch in his hand. He turned to Harriet, his eyes steady. "I never thought I'd find someone who knew how to live through ruin and still choose to love." She stepped closer. "I never thought anyone would love me after I forgot how to stand." He opened the pouch and pulled out a ring, simple and gold, the band slightly worn. "This was my mother's," he said. "I want you to wear it if you want me to stay." Harriet didn't answer. She took the ring and slid it onto her finger, then kissed him again, slow and certain. Clara watched from her cot, a smile touching the corners of her mouth, and for the first time she said both their names aloud, clear as frost and just as bright. That spring, Owen planted a row of beans behind the cabin, and Clara helped him mark the rows with river stones. Harriet worked in the garden and dried herbs on the porch rail. The fence held firm. The roof didn't leak. And at night they sat together by the fire with no ghosts left in the corners. They were not what they used to be, they were better.